Hey everybody, I'm Doug. I'm the Education Chair for the Colorado chapter of the Society of Professional Journalists and a member of the Programming Committee here at the Press Club. Welcome to the historic Press Club. But I'd like to welcome everybody on behalf of both organizations. Last week I was preparing to spend a day talking to students at CSU, and I wanted to offer some encouraging words to the aspiring journalists there. But these days I'm finding inspiration is tough to find in our beleaguered industry, so I called the best reporter who ever worked for me, and she told me the story of Lily Alexander. Lily, who now works for the Santa Fe New Mexican, covered the University of New Mexico campus police while working for the student newspaper at UNM. She initially wrote stories about the agency's officers not wearing body cameras, and she later filed an open records request seeking information on the type of weapons the agency used. When that request was denied, Lily promptly went out and hired an attorney and filed suit. After 2 years of legal wrangling, a judge recently ordered the records released. Lily is just one of many promising young journalists on the job and on the beat. Colorado SPJ and the Press Club award scholarships every year to help and encourage aspiring journalists like Lily. If you'd like more information, visit our websites or talk to one of our board members. And now Marco Cummings will introduce tonight's program. Grab this mic. There we go.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Marco Cummings. I am a Denver-based journalist and digital strategist for the Denver Post. And I'm also a board member here at the Society of Professional Journalists Colorado Pro chapter. Tonight we're having a book talk, a conversation about this book, Battle for the Bird, by Kurt Wagner, who's sitting next to me, about Jack Dorsey, Elon Musk, and the $44 billion fight for Twitter's soul. Kurt is a business and technology journalist covering social media for Bloomberg, where he's worked since 2019.
Yep.
He's also written for Recode, Mashable, and Fortune. Correct me if I messed up on any of these facts.
You're crushing it. This is great.
He grew up near Seattle, went to college at Santa Clara University, and now he currently resides here in Denver with his family. And a fun fact I was able to dig up is Kurt Wagner is also the alias for Nightcrawler from the X-Men.
That's right.
So
I get
we have
that.
some comic book fans in the crowd.
I actually get that a lot.
Kurt's superpower is actually getting sources to call him back. So with that, I'll start here. Kurt, what inspired you to write this book, and when did you realize this story was kind of bigger than day-to-day reporting?
Sure. Oh, thank you. First of all, thanks for coming out. I know it's always hard on a weeknight to come out and do anything, so appreciate that. I had wanted to write a book for a while because I work at Bloomberg and a lot of my colleagues there have written books, and you start to surround yourself with people who have done it, and it kind of motivates you to be like, I should try to do that. And Twitter was a company I had been covering for almost a decade, and I thought that the story of Twitter was quite riveting and interesting, and ups and downs and all the like fun things that happen to tech companies. And I actually pitched a book that was probably more of a biography of Jack Dorsey, who is the Twitter co-founder. And I thought, well, I'm going to use Jack as the main character and tell the story of Twitter through this guy, because I thought he was super interesting, undercover, like kind of a unique person in the tech scene. And I wrote a proposal. I shopped it around to all these publishers, took meetings, etc. And that was in April of 2022. Elon Musk showed up on Twitter's doorstep on like April 5th of 2022. So I was literally out shopping a Twitter book, and Elon showed up unexpectedly on Twitter's front door. And what's funny is in that moment, I remember actually being quite annoyed, because I was like, this guy's messing up my really great Jack Dorsey book, like he's now causing trouble for this project that I thought was going to be great. And it took me several months, literally, of watching him, try to buy the company, then try not to buy the company, whatever, before I was like, okay, the story's changed. Like, I had what I thought was a good idea, but that story is now not the story anymore. And so, in a lot of ways, I lucked out because I happened to be focused on this thing before it got incredibly interesting. And so I was then able to kind of pivot the book for the moment, which again, took me a while to get my brain around, but once I did, it was way better.
That was actually going to be my follow-up, is there's a lot of heavy background on Jack Dorsey. I guess for people who haven't read the book or are unfamiliar with Jack Dorsey, how can you explain him as kind of a character, and just tell us some interesting things you learned through your research.
One of the reasons I liked Jack Dorsey as a topic of journalism, like as someone to dig in on, is that he is very non-traditional in terms of like what you would expect from a big tech CEO. So a lot of big tech CEOs are, they love a lot of attention. They love the power and control that comes with running their company. Jack pretty openly said he did not want to be a CEO, and yet he was the CEO of Twitter and of what was then called Square, now called Block, at the same time. He had a unique personal life. He was not married, no kids, would walk through the streets of San Francisco to work every day in a t-shirt. He would, once he took the job at Twitter and he was running 2 companies, he started like experimenting with his own body, like on physical things. He would do hot tubs and cold plunges. He would fast for days at a time, silent meditation retreats where literally he wouldn't speak for an entire week. And I just thought, like, this is someone who's different. He's someone who's different than the traditional tech CEO profile. And so he drew me in as a journalist because I wanted to know more about him. And I found that he was a really perfect vehicle for this story in a lot of ways, because Twitter of old, and what I mean by that is like Twitter before Elon Musk showed up, I think had a lot of Jack Dorsey's DNA built into the company. And then Elon Musk showed up and changed things, and I think a lot of his DNA became what is now X. And so for me, it was a way to put human beings at the face of an otherwise, kind of faceless tech company. And so it was nice to have those 2 contrasting characters to build the story on.
And the book is kind of a reminder of, a lot of people think of Elon as kind of messing up or ruining Twitter, so to speak. Mm-hmm. But Twitter had its fair share of challenges before the takeover. Sure. Could you kind of touch on some of the challenges they dealt with?
Yeah, there was a ton of challenges. Some of them were traditional business challenges. For example, profitability eluded the company for most of its existence, well before Elon got there. They dealt with all kinds of issues with abuse, content policing challenges, what to take up, what to keep down. Obviously, it was well before Elon got there that they banned a sitting US president from the app, and that was a huge, storyline when that happened. The reason that Jack Dorsey ultimately left Twitter was kind of a confluence of different things, but activist investors, essentially Wall Street guys who thought Twitter was undervalued, came in, took a stake in the company, and essentially started forcing changes to be made, and including the potential they tried to throw him out of the company, and it didn't work. But imagine you're running this company you founded, it's your, perhaps your baby, your favorite thing, and then some guys from Wall Street, take a stake and say, all right, dude, like, you're not doing enough, get out. And that kind of is all detailed in the book, and it was a pivotal moment because I think it changed his view of the company. I think it changed his view of himself and in the role that he was in. And so all of these things that I just described happened before Elon ever got there. And that's part of why I thought there was a book in Twitter without Elon on the scene. There was all these other ups and downs that I could have written about. And what I ended up doing was writing, the first half of the book was very much sort of my original idea, and then the second half ends up kind of being Elon shows up and things go sideways. But it was not smooth sailing before Elon by any stretch.
And for folks who haven't covered Elon's companies, who might not be familiar, or for folks who aren't journalists, he's not the most friendly towards journalists as far as his companies. I'm pretty sure he's anti-PR and doesn't have a lot of PR for his companies. How challenging was it to write a book on Elon Musk, just knowing how kind of anti-journalist he's at least perceived to be?
I think if I was writing an entire book about Elon, it would have been almost impossible, quite frankly, without his buy-in. You'll notice there's been a few biographies of Elon that have been written, all with his blessing, essentially. And that's because he doesn't usually like to talk to journalists, and he doesn't like his circle of people to talk to journalists. And I think there's a combative relationship between journalism and Elon, in part because he just has a ton of wealth and power, so he's challenged a lot by journalists who are, challenging wealth and power. And he's also, quite frankly, he lies a lot, and he says things, whether they're intended to be malicious lies or not, he says things that are untrue quite often, and he's often called out for those things, and that creates more tension between him and journalism. But for this particular story, I did rely a lot on, I want to, acknowledge, I relied on some of those biographies that had access to him, right? Because I did not have access to him. So I did read several books about him to sort of get a sense of what he's like. Of course, I talked to people, anyone who I could get in front of me, about what it was like to work with him as well. But where I benefited, quite frankly, and this is a little bit dark, is like he took over the company and laid off 4,000 people like a week later. That's like 4,000 new potential sources for a book, right? And so all of these people who had worked at Twitter, who had experienced the summer of him trying to buy the company and not wanting to buy the company, et cetera, all those people sort of became free agents right as I was working on this book. And so it did free up a lot of people to talk with me who may not have otherwise. So even though they weren't necessarily within Elon's inner circle, there were people who had had meetings with him or had interacted with him in the brief time they were there, and suddenly they weren't employed by him anymore and felt more comfortable speaking to a journalist. So in some ways, I really got lucky, like benefited from the fact that he took over the company and did what he did in terms of laying people off, because it kind of opened up a lot of material for the book that I think might have been hard to get otherwise.
And you obviously touched on it a bit with your answer there, but what was your process like, and what kind of research went into this? I know there's actually several books out there right now, and a lot of them are based on a pretty big document dump at the time. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. The first half of the book truly was years in the making, because that was a lot of stuff I'd covered at Twitter before Elon got there. I had been a beat reporter covering the company and covering social media for a long time. So a lot of this was just in my notebook before I ever started. And we were talking a little bit about the benefit of hindsight earlier before the stream started. By the time I wrote the book, I was able to say, okay, what were the important pillar moments of this company over the last 6 to 10 years that I need to hit in order to explain to people why Elon showing up made sense or was important. And so I was able to hit this moment of Jack Dorsey trying to be forced out of the company. I was able to hit his return as CEO in 2015, which was a controversial thing at the time, in part because I covered those live and I covered them while they were happening, and so I was able to pull back from the notebook. I think the literal process, I was very lucky. Bloomberg, where I worked, gave me 3 months of paid book leave. So I was paid to write this book, at least for a short time. And I was never much into outlining, believe it or not. I always thought it was a little repetitive. I was like, why would I outline a story and then write the story? I'm just doing the work twice. My editor at Bloomberg, who had written a few books, was like, you need to outline times 10 in order for a book to work. And I reluctantly took that advice. And so I went into this book lead, this 3 months, with basically a framework for writing it. I was like, all right, week 1, I'm writing this chapter. Week 2, I'm writing this chapter. So I had like the outlines done each Monday when I'd show up at the coffee shop to write. I had my chapter outline ready to go, and I was like basically filling in this framework that I had created. It was a lot more work than I ever expected, but the actual logistics of how to write a book for me were like outlining and a lot of note cards, believe it or not. I would take, like, let's pretend I had a chapter. I would take all the events that I wanted to get into that chapter, write them individually on a note card, lay them on my living room floor, and sort of group them and be like, okay, like I'm gonna start here, and these note cards sort of fit together with this, and these ones fit together. And I sort of like literally puzzle pieced the chapters together, and I just took it chapter by chapter, and that's sort of, it worked one time. I don't know if I'd do it again the second time or not, but it worked once.
I asked you about Jack Dorsey. Could you do the same for us for Elon? How would you describe him? What
Sure.
did you learn about him through this whole research process?
Elon and Jack are about as opposite personality-wise as I think you can get. You know, Jack Dorsey talked about him being very quiet, someone who doesn't necessarily love to make decisions even. He kind of likes his team. He puts the team together and says, okay, you go forth, you have my support, just, you know, I brought you here to make that decision. Elon's sort of a one-man, control room. It's like, he's the boss, what he says goes. He's very intense. He expects people to be intense and match his energy. So if he's sleeping at the office, you might be sleeping at the office. You mentioned he doesn't really like PR. He likes to be his own spokesperson. He likes to be his own marketing manager. I think his feeling is, why would I pay for marketing when I can simply go and talk about my product in front of the press or at an event or whatever, and that's better than any marketing I would get otherwise. So they operate things very differently, and I think that was something I tried to get across in the book, was this sort of stark shift in culture at Twitter when Elon showed up. You know, before you had a very, I would quite frankly, like a little bit more relaxed, a little bit more like we're all working together because we love each other and we're trying to build this thing. And, you know, if that takes time, it takes time, no big deal. And I think Elon came in and was like, we are not friends. We are building this thing tomorrow. If you're on board, great, here's your cot, you can sleep at the office. And if you're not, like, quite frankly, there's the door, get out. And it was just a total change in mentality almost overnight. And I think that's part of what makes him both very successful, but of course very polarizing, is he's not necessarily I don't think he's thinking much about the human side of his employees so much as the outcome and output side of his employees. And quite frankly, a lot of people don't thrive in that kind of environment.
This is kind of unrelated, but also related, that I kind of got from your comment there. 996 is a big thing in Bay Area tech culture. Can you explain what that is, and is it good or bad, or does it depend on the company? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. 996 is, I believe, from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. 6 days a week. So not 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, but you're working, you know, basically around the clock all week long. It's very much a startup, like, hustle culture vibe. I think I don't want to misspeak, but I think it's relatively common or popular in parts of Asia. And I think that is maybe transitioning here to the US tech culture in particular. I think there's an up and coming group of tech CEOs and startup founders and people who have looked at what has become a relatively cushy tech world, right? So think about Google and the whole idea of, like, you get free lunch and you get free shuttle and you get free dinner and there's daycare for your kids and there's gym membership and all, you know. There's this idea that, like, working at these big tech companies, and that's not just Google, by the way, that's Meta and Apple and Amazon. Everyone has their own, it's slightly more relaxed in certain companies than others, but the idea being that working in big tech got cushy. And I think there's this idea now that like this, especially this group of AI companies that are coming up, there's like, this is hustle time. You know, you can relax when you're retired and old and you've made your billions of dollars, but now you're working pretty much around the clock because that's what it takes to build great technology and to win this AI race. And so Elon certainly, I don't know if he would ever call it, you know, 996 or whatever, but like he subscribes to that general mindset, which is like, this isn't a vacation, this isn't a lifestyle, this is a job, and I expect you to work really hard. And I think that's caught on with people. I'm sure there were people who believed that from the beginning, but it's become more socially acceptable, I think, to adopt that mindset. I think for a few years it was sort of like, hey, work-life balance is really important. If you push back on that, you're kind of seen as, you know, maybe not being sympathetic to your workers, and now it's sort of like, that's out the window. Come build great stuff and you can sleep later.
And before Elon took it over, what struck me from reading the book is Twitter made a couple pretty big missteps. The examples I put down here were Vine was pretty big, and now you see TikTok taking off, which is kind of a similar platform. And they also had an opportunity with the NFL streaming deal, and now you see how huge that is for Amazon. Can you talk about some of those missteps along the way like those?
They bought Vine. For those who don't know what Vine is, like 6-second looping videos. It's essentially TikTok before TikTok existed. They had it in the building, they bought it. Basically it was mismanaged. Huge missed opportunity, as you point out. I actually don't get into it too much in the book because it felt a little bit like a side story, you know what I mean? But where it does come back to what was going is it's sort of reflective of the culture and management of the company at that time. Like, they just couldn't quite get it right, and they had opportunities to become much bigger, much more profitable, just couldn't sort of navigate that. The Vine story, I won't get into too much specifically, but like, essentially they let,
Is Vine
TikTok. Vine was
Musk?
Yes, far before Musk. Vine was, I think, acquired in 2014, something like that. And it was shut down 2016, 2017. So like, this was well before Elon got there. But again, short looping videos with music. It was sort of like exactly what ended up becoming one of the biggest social apps in the world. They didn't quite get it. The NFL streaming thing is also interesting because that was a time of sort of, they were trying to figure out what they were. I think that's, all of these kind of come back to this idea that like Twitter maybe always struggled for a long time to figure out what it was and what the purpose of Twitter was. So for a while they were like, hey, when people watch football games, they oftentimes will check Twitter on the side. Like, Twitter's the second screen. They want to say, what are the other fans saying? Oh, someone just limped off the field. You know, what's going on? Like, did they get hurt? Are they sick? And so there was this feeling of like, let's merge those things, right? Why not have the game and all that commentary on the same screen? And so they surprisingly won the rights to some Thursday night football games, so the digital rights. So they're streaming live NFL games on the Twitter app. But the problem was they were not really rich enough as a company to afford the bidding war that ensued from that. I think they were a perfect guinea pig. It was sort of like, hey, does this work? Is there appetite for this type of thing? What might it look like? And then once they kind of proved like, hey, this might, you know, there's a market for like digital NFL rights, they ran up against Amazon and Netflix and Meta and all these other companies that had, 10 times the buying power. And so unfortunately, like with Vine, it was mismanagement. I think with NFL, it was more, they just weren't really in the same ballpark to afford that. They got a taste of it and they couldn't really hold on to it. And again, missed opportunity nonetheless.
But that being said, Elon had made some missteps himself as well. For me personally, I think the X rebrand is probably a big one because you speak in journalist circles. They still refer to it as Twitter, and I'm sure most run-of-the-mill users do as well. Could you talk a little about that and some of the other perhaps missteps that he made during this acquisition?
I think the rebrand, if you talk to marketing folks, will tell you is one of the maybe worst decisions ever, because there was so much brand, like kind of free brand equity when he took it over. It was a globally recognized name, and he sort of threw it out the window. And I truly think he did it out of spite. I think like Twitter to him represented a lot of things. It represented sort of this old guard, these old executives that he had fought in court. It represented what he viewed as censorship. It represented essentially everything that he was trying to get rid of. And so I think in his mind, it was like, in order to build the thing I want, I have to kind of burn down the old thing to start fresh. Because if it's always called Twitter, it will always have those lingering sort of issues that he saw with the company. I think from a brand standpoint, I think it was a mistake as well, just because it'd be like buying, this is a little dramatic, but it'd be like buying Coca-Cola and then just being like, all right, we're now calling it something totally different. It's sort of like, well, everyone knows what that is, and you threw that out. I actually think his biggest mistake was eliminating the blue verification check marks when he got into Twitter. And two things. If you recall, the main reason he claims that he wanted to get out of the Twitter deal, after he originally agreed to buy Twitter, he spent a lot of time trying to get out of that deal. It was that he claimed that there were too many bots on the service. He was like, I don't know who's a real human. There's just bots everywhere. This is like, the numbers are juiced, all this stuff. And so a big part of his effort was like, I'm going to determine who's a real human and who's not. The blue check marks already did that for him for a pretty notable part of the Twitter universe, right? Like Twitter had gone out and verified, you are Marco, or I am Kurt, or that's LeBron James, and these are real people running these accounts. And so he kind of said, like, that's what I want to have happen, and yet all the work that had already been done to do that, at least with more prominent users, he just threw in the trash. Again, I think sort of because of spite. I think the other issue is, quite frankly, as much as Twitter is sort of democratizing, everyone has a voice, right? Like anybody can tweet, anybody can say what they want. The reason you went to Twitter was to hear from those blue check mark people. Like that's kind of what made Twitter cool, was that you could go and see the real sort of unfiltered thoughts from celebrities and musicians and politicians and whatever. And by basically saying, hey, you guys are all elitist, a-holes who don't deserve blue checks, he kind of turned a lot of those people off. And a lot of them lost their blue check and were simply like, I don't need to be here anymore, see you later. And so not only did he make it harder to verify real identity of people, which killed sort of the credibility of like what you see on your feed, but he took the most prominent users and he pissed a bunch of them off for not really any reason, in my opinion. And a lot of them haven't come back. And I think, would they have stayed if they kept their blue check? I know it sounds a little vanity silly, but the reality is, like, I just don't think there was any reason for him to do those things and still accomplish what he wanted to accomplish. But I think he was so hell-bent on kind of, again, distancing himself from what Twitter was, that he was willing to torch the whole thing and start fresh.
And that leads into kind of my grand philosophical question of, did Elon fix Twitter or did he completely wreck it? And there's plenty of people with opinions on both sides, but just wanted to get your take on it.
I think Twitter is much worse than it was when he took over. And my view is that Twitter, for me, served as a utility for one thing, which was breaking news, quite frankly. If there was, if I'm driving in San Francisco where I used to live, and there's 10 fire trucks on the corner of some street, my first thing I would do is pull out Twitter and type in 10th Street, San Francisco, and see, like, is someone tweeting about this? What's going on? That, to me, that's a micro version of the news on Twitter. It could also work for, global news stories. But the news value was what made Twitter indispensable. And I just talked about getting rid of check marks. We talked about his disdain for the press and the media. I think he came in and he took the one thing that Twitter was best at and basically said, that's not what we're gonna be anymore. We're gonna be an entertainment platform. And you've perhaps noticed like he's leaned heavily into video, he's leaned heavily into just stuff that keeps people scrolling, but in my opinion doesn't add a ton of value. And so, you know, is Twitter better or worse? In my opinion, it's worse because the thing that I thought it was best at is no longer really relevant, in my opinion, at least to the same degree. Is it still entertaining? Does it still have users? Are they still making money? Like, yes, yes, yes. But, you know, if I just want to watch like videos that take up my time, there's a bunch of places I can go do that. I haven't found anything that replicates the news value of what Twitter used to be.
All right, on that note, I'm going to open it up for questions from our folks that we have here. Anybody have any questions?
Hi, thanks for coming tonight. I'm looking forward to reading the book. From a business competition point of view, do you have much of a sense that First Threads and now Blue Sky have stolen much business away from X, or are they just still too small potatoes for X to work?
Yeah. I think both Threads and Blue Sky have stolen users, certainly. I think they've stolen part of the conversation. I think originally Twitter was kind of its own beast. Like, it was much smaller than Facebook and Instagram and TikTok, but again, it had a niche. Like, it had a role that it played that none of those others could really compete with. I think that's now been fragmented. So some people will still get their news from X, but now some people go to Blue Sky, some people go to Threads. So I think that it's lost its stranglehold on, again, that news thing that it did. From a business standpoint, I wouldn't say it's been hurt yet, but I'd say that's coming. Because Threads is owned by Meta, which is arguably the best advertising business in the world, and Meta and Google are 1A and 1B. And once Meta kind of turns that spigot on and simply says, hey, do you want to start advertising in this type of feed, right? With news or politics or like short text-based posts. If I'm an advertiser on Twitter today, I'm probably like, great, I can kind of accomplish the same thing, but actually Meta is much better at advertising than X is in terms of efficiency and delivery and stuff like that. So they just haven't done that yet. They've started to tinker with ads on Threads, but like fast forward 2 years, and I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the money that went to X goes toward Threads. I could be wrong, but just knowing the track record that Meta has around advertising, I wouldn't be surprised if that ultimately happens.
You mentioned at one point the mismanagement of Vine.
Yeah.
Why was it mismanaged to a stunning degree? Was it a lack of putting the appropriate people in the appropriate positions, or was it a creative direction-based issue? Like, what was that?
So this is a great question. And again, I spent a lot of time reporting this, and I didn't actually put it in the book, which maybe if there was one more chapter I would add it might have been this. I think there were two things. Twitter bought Vine in part as a response to what was then Facebook buying Instagram. So Twitter really wanted to buy Instagram, Facebook outbid them for Instagram, and the model that Facebook used for Instagram was essentially leave it alone. Like, keep its brand, keep the team that built it, they get kind of their own little office on campus. Like, it's a startup within a big tech company. Twitter misses out on Instagram, and so they buy Vine instead, and they essentially copy that same management model. The team's in New York, Twitter's headquarters are in San Francisco, the Vine team's in New York. The problem is, quite frankly, the Vine team wasn't, they didn't execute as well as the Instagram team. Like, Kevin Systrom and Mike Krieger, the Instagram co-founders, are sort of now known as, tech legends, if you will. The Instagram guy, or the Vine guys, excuse me, they just didn't execute on the same level. And so Twitter's decision to sort of like, hey, you guys just go do your thing over in New York, kind of backfired because they weren't capable of doing their own thing without oversight. So that was issue number one. I still think they could have survived despite that, because they had all of these creators show up to Vine and create really cool, fun, new videos. Like this looping 6-second thing was like brand new. They've made no efforts until it was too late to pay any of these people. So if you're a creator and you're sitting there going, hey, I have 1 million followers on Vine, but this is my day job. Like I'm literally spending, all day coming up with these fun skits and I'm filming them and whatever, and I make no money. But I can go to YouTube and I can put that video, I can make that 6-second video 30 seconds, and now I can make money. Or I can go to Instagram and I can get a deal with, a local brand or whatever. And so what they did was they basically did not acknowledge the fact that they had these awesome creators creating stuff for free for them until it was too late. So mismanaged, didn't appreciate the talent, and eventually the talent went where they could make money elsewhere, and by that point, it was sort of, it was done.
We're taking audience questions. I see a couple folks just walked in. Let me move the mic over here.
All right, so as a former user, your book being entitled The Battle for Twitter's Soul.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when Musk was going to buy Twitter. I remember when he was going to back out. I remember my reaction was, good.
Hmm.
This will be better for the platform.
Yeah.
The board went apoplectic
Yeah.
and was like, no. Well, because I guess if you look at it from a shareholder standpoint, this is a ton of money.
Yeah.
I don't exactly know where my question is on this, but the concept of, or the idea of this company making a decision for monetary reasons over
Yeah.
the battle for Twitter's soul, I can't imagine that the people who were on the board, the shareholders of Twitter, didn't acknowledge the fundamental change in the soul that would be happening,
Sure.
but they wanted it for the money. So this whole concept, I'm throwing it out there to see where you take it.
Yeah. Well, I'll wait for this real quick. Jack Dorsey would love a conversation with you probably, because this is this whole thing. It's like, capitalism, this idea that publicly traded companies are beholden to shareholders, quite frankly, and to making money for investors, and not necessarily to what is best for society, humanity, even the user, right? It's purely about the board members have a fiduciary duty to make as much money for shareholders as possible. And so here's what happens. In spring of 2022, Elon Musk comes in, he makes a pretty crazy bid for Twitter that quite frankly overvalued the company. I don't know for sure, but part of me thinks maybe he thought they would just say no, like this was all a bit of a stunt or what, trying to make a point. But the board quite frankly says, this is the best, this is the most valuable Twitter might ever be. And we have a duty as fiduciaries to accept it. And once they do, and then the stock, I don't know if you remember, but the stock market had like a pretty dramatic dip and Elon lost a bunch of his net worth and all this stuff. They kind of had this guy like in a trap, right? And they're like, well, you signed the paperwork, now we really can't let him go. Because he offered to buy it for 44, if he walks away, it's now worth 30. And they're staring down the barrel of investor lawsuits. They're probably all going to be potentially, kicked off the board. They could lose their job as board members. So it's kind of sad, to your point, because it's all driven by the financial mechanisms set up by publicly traded companies. Is like they were beholden to the shareholders to make them as much money as possible, regardless of what that meant for the good of the company or the user base or whatever. And Quite frankly, that was one of the issues Jack Dorsey had with Twitter being a public company. And if you ever listen to him talk, and it's in this book, he talked a lot about wanting to take Twitter private, because he kind of thought like that was the best way to actually build things that matter. It's like you can't be beholden to Wall Street. You can't be beholden to these activist investors from Elliott Management who just sort of show up on your doorstep and demand you make changes. He's like, in order to make a great product, you kind of have to be able to make tough decisions, even if they're not great for the business. But when you're publicly traded, that's almost impossible to do. And I think this is what unfortunately kind of happened to Twitter. Like Elon overbid, they kind of caught him overbidding a little bit, and then they refused to let him walk away, because if they did, believe it or not, they would have gotten, as bad as they may have felt handing it over and watching it go down, the alternative was they let him off the hook, and now they're hit with several shareholder lawsuits from people who say, hey, you cost me 50% on my investment. So it was a pretty much, you could say, maybe a bit of a lose-lose situation in that sense.
Any other questions from the audience?
Thank you. I actually have just a couple of comments. I read the book. One of the things I want to say is I love the cover.
Thank you.
So I think it makes a big difference. I'm in the book club, as I was telling you, and I've seen a ton of covers, and I really enjoyed this one.
Thank you.
I also right away got that you had sort of like maybe a fascination with Jack Dorsey, because he mentioned so many. It was actually fascinating for me to read too. I didn't know very much about him. It found to be like a very fascinating character. All of the facts you put in there about him kind of drew me into the book. And then I know it wasn't necessarily, maybe you didn't have the whole thing planned, right? It was going to be more about Jack Dorsey, and then kind of go off of that. And then Elon came in and kind of threw a little bit of a curveball, but. I think it worked out in your favor, because it sort of, like I said, it just kind of drew me in. And then, any other books on the horizon for you?
I'm only chuckling because sorry. I know you all can hear me, but I only chuckled at, first of all, thank you. Two quick thoughts. The cover thing was like one of the most fun parts of doing a book, because the publisher like sends you all these different versions of the cover, and it feels very surreal, and that was like a very fun, as someone who'd never written a book before, that was a fun process to go through. I had most of my family members like weigh in, I'd send them like 6 versions, and we'd all vote and see which one we liked the best. I chuckled about the other book thing, in part because I get asked that all the time. I would love to write another book. I really enjoyed the process. I was told I would hate writing a book by people who have written them. It is a ton of work, but I enjoyed it. The challenge is, at least for me, I literally was like eat, sleep, breathe Twitter for like 2 years. And I'm still, the book's been out almost 2 years, I'm still here talking about Twitter, right? So like, it has to be a topic that you are willing to dive headfirst into and be immersed in. I mean, I would go for run, like I'd write, and then I'd be like, I need a run to like clear my head, and I'd spend the entire run like working through like that one sentence that I didn't know how to do. It was just no escaping it. So I have yet to find a topic that I'm willing to put that much mental energy into yet. But if and when it ever comes around, I would love to do it again, because it was a really rewarding experience. And thanks again for reading.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm curious, where do you see the future of Twitter, given the fact that there's more competition for those types of social media platforms now? We were talking about this earlier, Threads, Blue Sky, some of these other ones. And there was when Blue Sky got started, I remember that there was a lot of people who abandoned Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And I was one of them, more or less. But where do you see the future? Do you see it? Do you see Musk, for example, selling it, which he has talked about doing? And where do you see it headed?
Yeah. Thank you. I talked a little bit about the news element of Twitter before you got up here. And that's what I thought Twitter was great at, right? It was the news platform. I don't think we're ever gonna go back to that. I think that ship has sailed. So then it becomes, well, what is Twitter for? And there's what it is for now, which in my opinion is sort of like, I don't even know, video, like doom scrolling videos, quite frankly. Like when I open it up, it's a common, I'm a huge sports fan, so I will say this about X, I'm sorry, not Twitter anymore, X. I actually get a lot of value as a sports fan because I follow the beat writers of my favorite teams, I follow like the national NFL people, and so like on NFL Sunday, I'm on there like, hey, did someone get hurt, or what's the score of a game, or whatever. So there's some value still for me as a sports fan to Twitter. But a lot of what I see otherwise is like pretty dark videos, like pretty polarizing political takes, people sort of trying to be witty or funny in dark ways. Like it feels like dark humor to me, like kind of like if you went to a club and they have like an after dark version, it's sort of like that's what it feels like all the time. So that's kind of what I think it is now. What I think Elon would like it to be is a version of that that also includes payments. So you may have heard him talk about this everything app, this idea that you open it up, it's like Venmo, you have money, you know, I can send you money, you can send me money, I see an ad for something, I click it, I can buy it right there with the money that's in my account. I don't know who needs that, quite frankly. Like, I'm not sure if that solves a need for people, but I could see 5 years from now being more like, that X is more like an Instagram or like a dark version of Instagram or TikTok or something. You know, it's more for entertainment. They make money from some ads, and hopefully for them, they get you putting your money into the system so that you can easily buy things or send money. I don't really know where that fits into the cultural scene, because I think unfortunately it's now so fragmented for what it used to be good at between Blue Sky and Threads and others that we can't go back to that. And so it feels like a thing that's sort of seeking a little bit of relevance, in my opinion. It's there, some people find it entertaining and fun, but like, is it necessary? And I don't know if they've solved that yet.
I'm a little curious about your choice of diction with the word soul. Well, because like, you know, obviously, you know, brain, heart, soul, your brain is more decision-based. You know, your heart is necessary but ultimately replaceable, but soul is a lot more personal. It's a lot more eternal. And you were writing this in real time. So I guess my question is at what point, while Elon was trying to acquire this, did you realize that this is going to be some really innate fundamental change in the way this company runs?
Okay.
I think that idea came across probably after Elon took over and started laying people off. I think, listen, layoffs happen all the time at companies that are doing even well, right? It's just like, hey, we need to report some good cost cuts to Wall Street, and they cut jobs. So I don't mean to imply that like laying people off was even a bad business move. But what I think I started to learn in that first month or so after he took over, I talked a little bit about like Jack Dorsey and how Twitter 1.0 sort of reflected his personality, and X and Twitter 2.0 started to reflect Elon's. To me, it felt like soul felt like the right word. Like it was like a soul of a place, a culture of a company that had just been sort of ripped out and replaced with something else. And I think for people who were supportive of Twitter 1.0, it really felt like the death of a thing that they knew, right? Like Twitter was something, and Elon killed that something to replace it with something else, and like its soul was gone. It was a new entity. And I think that's sort of what I was trying to get at. Some people will find that dramatic, which is, I think, fair, especially for a tech company, right? Like, do tech companies even have souls? I think that's probably a different discussion topic for us to get into. But in this case, you know, if you read the book, you'll see there's I spent a decent amount of time talking about the culture at Twitter before Elon got there, and what the employees were like and what the vibe was like. And I think maybe after reading it, it'll make a little bit more sense, because it will feel like a very different entity than it started as.
Kind of a weird question, but it's something I've been thinking about a lot. After Elon purchases Twitter, changes to X, and then we're talking about how a sitting president had been censored from the platform. It's like, no, we're not going to do that anymore. In fact, we're not going to do any policing of people's comments and stuff like that. And then shortly afterwards, Meta goes, on the news and like, we're not going to do that either anymore. We're going to allow the community to kind of police themselves. Do you ultimately think that was a good thing for freedom of speech, or do you think it was kind of like a double-edged sword?
The throwing the playbook, the rule book out type of thing? This is such a good question, because every single person has a different answer, probably, or like the line of what should and shouldn't be acceptable on these platforms is probably going to be very different for everybody. The way I've always thought about it is as a private enterprise, essentially, right? Like not government, like these are private companies in that sense. I think they have every right to create a community that they think people want to show up to, right? So whether that means, hey, we're going to police certain words because we want people to feel safe here, or it's a free for all. You can say whatever you want. Both of those decisions are going to attract different audiences, and I think that they have sort of within their right as leaders of these private companies to go where they want in that regard. I tend to probably lean more to the first version of sort of like, I don't like to hang out in places where anyone can say literally anything they want. It's pretty dark. It's not very enjoyable. Like you see certain things that immediately I'm just like, I don't want to participate in this anymore. So for me, I probably am more comfortable in communities that have got rules versus the free-for-all. That being said, I mean, it's easy, I think now to say with hindsight, like COVID was a real dramatic turning point for this whole thing, because a lot of these companies, it's hard to remember now, or maybe it's not hard to remember, but like it was a global health emergency. Everyone was like afraid. I remember we'd get groceries delivered and you're like wiping them down with Clorox wipes on your front porch, right? I mean, like the crazy things. And in that moment, there was this feeling that like, if the tech companies aren't policing what people say about COVID, people might die. And so they're sitting there going, well, we're going to be extra cautious. We're going to take down all this stuff because we don't want someone to die and be like, well, I read it on Facebook or I read it on Twitter. And again, now in hindsight, it's sort of like, man, that was maybe too dramatic. Maybe the pendulum swung too far. That's what's, I'm guessing, going to happen here as well, right? Is where that pendulum swung really far, where it was like, hey, we're taking down too much stuff. These places are penalizing people for things maybe that shouldn't have been penalized. And now Elon and Mark Zuckerberg and others come in and they're saying, just throw the rule book out, right? And eventually we're going to get to a point where it goes in the other direction and something's going to be said or happen and people are just going to be like, I'm out. And in order to win people back, they're going to have to add more rules, is my assumption, right? And so I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, because it's sort of like this thing is always moving. But I tend to believe like these are private enterprises that can make that decision. I might not necessarily agree with where they draw the line as a consumer or even just like as a human being, but I'm also like, they're building the community they want, and we as users have every right to also say, see you later, like we're leaving, right? So it's complicated. Is the short version, but I do feel like we'll probably see the pendulum continue to swing back and forth.
Sure. Final question, anyone?
Is there anything good about X nowadays, other than the sports reporting?
Yeah.
And I keep looking at the contributions that it has made to our political discourse.
Yeah.
And they're horrific. I was writing a story today about somebody who went off on somebody else. These were Democrats were yelling at other Democrats. So I kind of worry about, what are we getting out of this?
Yeah.
I do agree with the sports reporting part.
Sports, yeah.
What?
Go Mariners.
No,
Me too.
no,
Hey,
no, no.
I'm going to the game tomorrow.
Are you?
I'm flying to Seattle in the morning. Are you you're a Mariners
I
fan?
was.
Let's talk
in
more about this
Seattle,
later.
yeah. I lived in Seattle for about 2 years.
All right, good.
And
Yeah.
Twitter or X is a good way to, watch the
Yeah.
highlights. You fall asleep before the 15th inning a couple of nights.
Sure. I would never, but anyway, we got more to talk about later.
Other than sports stuff.
Yeah, other than sports stuff.
Which I do that.
Honestly, I can't really think of anything from a content standpoint where I would say this is better than it was. And, I guess I could probably put more thought into it and maybe come up with something. I think if you're trying to defend the acquisition of Elon, you could say two things. You could say, one, I think he proved that you can run Twitter with a lot fewer people than they did. So maybe as a business, it was a little bloated. Maybe they weren't as efficient with the money or talent that they could have been, right? So you could say, hey, look, he took over a company that has 8,000 people and it's down to like, I don't know where it is exactly, but 1,500 people, and it still operates and it still does a lot of these things. I guess that's sort of a like, okay, he proved his point that Twitter was too big. There's some who say they move faster. Also, they ship things faster. I actually don't necessarily believe that's the case. Like they talk about a lot of things that don't actually materialize. But the idea that they could move faster, smaller team. I think those things are maybe like if I had to say, hey, here's some positives of this acquisition, like he's proved those things out. I just struggle to find where the discussion on X is any better than it was before. I think in some places it's on par. Like, again, sports for me, it's not a huge difference from what I see today than what I saw 5 years ago. But I struggle to find other parts of the culture on X that I find better today than they were before. And I'm sure there were people who disagree. There are people who thought Twitter was way too left-leaning or whatever and maybe feel that they found more of a community than they had 5 years ago. And that's totally fine. For me, it just hasn't been the case.
You have time for one more.
I can go forever. The fact that you guys want to talk about this book is great. Yeah.
I'm interested if you think that there will be a need to amend our Constitution as a foundation for all people to be protected, have the same rights, privileges, not just for AI, but for these platforms.
Jeez.
And it's not vice versa to say that the platforms will be, edited by an underlying foundation, but it seems as though there's a constant encroachment on freedom of speech or, just exposure to so much that whether it's true or false, how do we protect the people from discerning for themselves? Because honestly, people are fed and they just take what they're fed.
Sure.
Not a lot of people are wary or education enough to understand and discern the difference between media and what it's feeding them. So, there's cults and stuff, but that's kind of another culture, if you will, more deeply. So my question for you is, do you think that there's a need to amend our Constitution to protect the people from social media?
Let me, just because my question's a riff on exactly that. She's talking constitutional, I'm talking section 230.
Yeah.
Concept of online platforms as publishers and distributors, given the changes, is it time to reconsider all this at a constitutional level or at a statutory level?
Man, you guys say I should have closed off questions before we got to these. These are like
It's a good
the
final
two
question.
heaviest questions of the night, right at the very end. I'm going to start with Section 230 because I've thought more about that, if you don't mind, and then come back to the Constitution one. The Section 230 thing is interesting because, for those who aren't familiar, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act essentially protects all these platforms from being sued for the things that their users post. Right? So I could go in, I say something illegal, as long as they basically take it down, they're not held liable for my behavior as a user. My sense is that that is still incredibly important to the basic operation of all these companies. Because if they were going to be held liable for everything every one of their users posted, they would actually take down the argument is that they would take down way more stuff. Because they'd be so afraid of being sued that pretty much everything that isn't like, I'm having a great day today, is going to be taken down because they're like, we just don't want to take the risk. And so in some ways, Section 230 actually, in a weird way, maybe creates a space for more speech for people because the platforms are willing to leave stuff up. That would be the argument. Where we're seeing people try to get around that, which I think is interesting, is instead of going after the content on these platforms, they are going after the design of the technology itself. So instead of saying, hey, Kurt, posted something that created this bad incident to happen, they're going after, for example, on Snap, this idea that they are proactively recommending to teenagers that they should connect with child predators, right? They're the algorithm. The technology behind the company is actually encouraging negative behavior, which doesn't have anything to do with the content so much as it has to do with the tech itself. So we're seeing a handful of lawsuits now that are getting more traction against these tech companies because they're no longer going after the post, they're going after the recommendation algorithm, or they're going after the notifications or whatever it may be. I don't know if those will work either in terms of holding these companies more accountable, but it's an interesting twist to the saga. So I'm not a scholar or expert on all these things. I write about them and I observe them the way you do, but my sense is that Section 230 is still necessary if we want these platforms to enable as much speech as they do. So that's that. In terms of changing the Constitution, my opinion matters as much as yours, in the sense that I don't know if anybody would listen to what I have to say on this, but generally I think the idea, I said this earlier, I think to your question, generally I believe that it's up to the private companies, with exceptions, right? Obviously child sexual abuse material, terrorism, propaganda. There are certain things that I think and already are illegal.
Words.
I'm sorry?
Words.
Words.
As you mentioned earlier,
Yeah.
Placate.
I think that there are certain things that are already universally taken down by these companies because they're illegal. I struggle with the idea that we need more, quite frankly, like government oversight into what we can and cannot say. I would rather the companies, as annoying as it is for them to make that call, I would rather them make that call and then suffer the consequences of either no one wants to be here or I can't get advertisers because I let people, talk about racism or whatever. Like, they are making a business decision that will, my hope is they will pay the price that way, right? It's imperfect, but the thought of the government continuing to dictate exactly what can and can't be said makes me more nervous, I guess, than the tech companies making those decisions themselves. Maybe I'd love your thoughts afterwards. I feel like I disappointed you. So.
Final thoughts, and what do you have on the horizon? Where can people find you?
Well, thanks again for coming. I mean, it's a weeknight, and all of you have lives, and it was nice of you to be here. I'm still working at Bloomberg. I'm still covering all of these social platforms. So you can find my work. I'm mostly posting the threads these days. I just find it to be of the options, the one I resonate most with. So you can find my stuff there. And I'm happy to share emails as well if anyone cares to send me, reader fans. X-Threads, Blue Sky. I'm on all. I'm active as a lurker on all, but I'm active as a poster mostly on Threads these days. And believe it or not, LinkedIn. Who would have ever thought? But LinkedIn, I do post to as well. Stay tuned for another book someday. Nothing even in the oven yet, but someday perhaps there will be. So thank you again for coming. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Again, this book is called Battle for the Bird, Jack Dorsey, Elon Musk, and the $44 billion fight for Twitter's soul. Amazon.
Everywhere you can buy books,
Spotify,
pretty much, yeah.
Audible, which is also Amazon. I'd like to thank everybody for coming out tonight. Again, SPJ Colorado Pro. We have another event coming up on November 4th with Justin Adams of CBS to discuss Bubbles Anderson, one of Colorado's first Negro League baseball players. So that should be an interesting event for us. You can follow us on all the platforms as well. This live stream will be available on our YouTube channel, SPJ Colorado Pro. And again, thank you for everyone coming out tonight, and thanks for the Press Club for hosting us.
And thank you to my board colleague, Marco Cummings, for organizing tonight's event.
Yeah, thank you.